All right.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Winterset Public Library. Thank you so much, Chris, for having us. And we're really excited to have Linda Smith here talking about the anniversary of Pammel Park, the 100-year anniversary of Pammel Park, our crown jewel of the county. My name is Jessie Lowry, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for Madison County Conservation. And we just really want to thank all of you for being here tonight, and especially thank Linda for all of her hard work for doing this digging and finding these cool pictures and finding these cool stories and showing us pictures of Dr. Pammel and telling us how it was intertwined with George Washington Carver and showing these cool drone pictures of the Backbone Ridge, because this is a park that we can really be proud of. And what we've been talking about, Amy Warkey is here, our naturalist, and we've been working on our fundraiser that's coming up this Saturday, which I'll talk about in a minute. And as we reflect back on the last 100 years of Pammel Park, you know, this is just something that we can all be proud of, and that we can all really thank those folks a long time ago, 100 years ago and more, for their vision, because every single summer, Amy and I get to lead kids through the park. And we are having the same experiences as Dr. Pammel and Dean Darling and all those other founders of the park. Finding snails, learning to love nature, and it is because of their vision that we have this legacy today. And so I just wanted to be here, first of all, to thank Linda for all of her hard work and to learn from Linda, because it is so exciting to learn about the history of this park, and also to give a plug about our event this Saturday. So it is Evening Under the Stars. It's our annual event for Madison County Conservation. It's going to be out at Pammel Park. It's our 100-year anniversary, as I said. It's going to be at the Pammel Park Lodge, and then we'll have a big light tent as well. We've got a catered meal off the griddle, Madison County pork producers. After the catered meal, well, before we've got Madison County Winery, of course, and then after the meal, we've got an old-fashioned tractor that will make homemade ice cream. We'll have a Ford Model T car there for some photo opportunities, a great auction, and the proceeds from each one of these events goes to just increasing the public awareness and the education, the environmental education in the county. Some of the specific projects that the money is going towards now is a scholarship fund for our summer programming. So all the kiddos that want to go to our summer camps can go, no matter if they have money or not. Also to like special technology, we are installing a Modus tower, which is a tower that will be able to detect any animal, like a bird or an insect that has a radio collar on throughout the county, so we can really track the migration routes of lots of different animals. It'll go to maintaining our parks and our trails. We maintain almost 2,000 acres around the county, and mostly we maintain them for recreation, but also for wilderness. So we can have some really high quality habitat for all of our wildlife here, because we know that Madison County has such unique resources, and a lot of it has to do with the topography. And a lot of it has to do with Dr. Pammel. And so this is very, very exciting for us. Please let us know if you want to go to Evening Under the Stars. You can get tickets online, or you can call our office. And also the big elephant in the room, the Conservation Center, which many of you guys have been supporting over the years. The Conservation Center has been in over a decade in the making. And we are getting closer and closer to the finish line. And we are all frustrated for how long it's taking, but we really are on the home stretch now. So people always ask, well, when's it going to be ready? Well, we've learned that lesson a few times in the past months, that we can't give people a certain date, but we really are in the home stretch now, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. When it is opened, it is going to be a game changer for the community. We want it to be a gathering hub for everybody. It's for all to use. And it's going to have a modern classroom, a big gathering event for everybody, indoor, outdoor classroom, an outdoor patio, exhibits, live animals, the whole deal. So we are right on the precipice of that. So, and I know that many of you guys have been so supportive of us over the years. So thank you guys so much. On your way out, I have some postcards to give you about the event. And thank you again, Linda. Really appreciate your hard work. happy 100-year anniversary of Pammel Park. It's a really special time for our county and for natural resources. And with that, I'll give it to Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Linda, and thank you all for coming tonight. I've really been looking forward to this. Hey Kai. When Dulce and I first moved here, Pammel Park was the very first place that we fell in love with. It's such a magical place to go to. I just want to say a couple of things that are coming up here at the library over the next month. We have Paul Meyer, who is going to be doing a photography class next week. Should be a lot of fun if you guys can make it to that. And then next month in October, Laura Keys is going to be coming over from Illinois, and she's going to be doing a talk on the history of the Wizard of Oz, which should be really fun. I think she even dresses up for that, but don't quote me on that. Should be really cool. But that's about it. Of course, we'll have more stuff going into the winter months, more programs and fun stuff. So just kind of keep an eye on our calendar. But without further ado, let me announce a pillar of the community and a great friend of the library, which we very much appreciate. Let's welcome Linda Griffith Smith.
First of all, everyone get a seat. I know some of them are in the front, but let's get you seated. Once I get going, it'll be a while. And I want to thank Jesse. Jesse and I have cooperated on several projects, so I know that you're indebted that the Historic Preservation Commission and the courthouse took some heat off the Conservation Center, and now we'd like to give it back to you. All right. We're trying some new things tonight. I'll be using a microphone, and Chris is recording us. So those of you watching this later think, boy, that was rough.
Might not be turned off. And I do have some more players here.
Thank you. For those of you who think this might be a little rough, it's because it is. Okay, first time. Also the first time for my backbone presentation. So I have my notes here, and I'll be going through those as well. I like to say that my presentations are a scrapbook. They're not particularly academic, they're what interested me, and so then you get to look at my scrapbook. This one is a baby book. We're only going to talk about the first 10 years of Pammel Park, and you'll see how much of the development is already in place. Can you see, Brian? Can you see the screen okay? Okay. All right. So we're going to do a chronological look, and then sometimes I'll just veer way off to the left. So, but we'll get it all together in the end. And you'll notice here as I went through this, and this is one reason I like to study history, is that they have the same struggles, the same personalities, the same problem with government that we do. It really hasn't changed much in 100 years. So this picture is by Todd Scott, the drone guy. I thought he put this out on Facebook last year. He's a good friend of Historic Preservation and let me borrow it for the presentation, and Conservation's going to use it too. So I'm sure you can tell what's what there, but here's the east entrance, and down here would be the ford. We can't quite see it. And then the lodge would be over here, and the backbone shelter would be, be up here, be behind us. So the ridge is between 150 and 250 feet. You never quite know. The more newspapers you read, the more variances I had and stuff. But it's about 200 feet across from one side of the tunnel to the other, and 150 to 200 feet high. And it winds back in here. Do you know how long it winds? There you go. Who's that? 2.5 miles. 2.5 miles. It's long. It's really long. So happy 100, Pammel Park. That is from Iowa State Parks Library and was a life-size casting of, or life-size plan of a bronze plaque they were going to put up. But I'm going to start before the park with the Harmon Mill, and actually I'm going to start before the mill and talk a little bit about the indigenous people. that were in Madison County, and they knew Backbone and used to be able to find a lot of arrowheads and evidence of them, and notice how bare it is. And actually most of Madison County was very bare, except along the riverbanks and creeks. The rest of it had very few trees. So they wandered that backbone back and forth after they signed treaties and had to move out of Iowa. They lived in Kansas. Tama Indians, they were Meskwaki. Tama had their village up there, and they would travel back and forth. So their band leader here was named Johnny Green. If you've ever heard that, and you'll hear it again tonight. John Harmon got here in the late 1850s and built the mill over 3 years. And I could tell you about 10 stories about the Harmon Mill, telling you the same thing with different dates. That's one that really moves around. But they finished about 1860, and they did grist, and they did woods. Some say wood and then grist, some say grist and then wood. Eventually it was sold to 2 or 3 people, and in 1904 it was torn down. It was no longer profitable. And what Harmon did was cut that first trace, they call that, through the limestone. It's got a limestone overburden, but there was a gray shell that was soft, shale. I didn't say that very well, shale. That was soft, that with hand tools they dug through there. And it was about 6 feet wide and about 6 feet tall. And someone back in the day that was a boy there said you always scratched your back on the top of it at first because you had to bend over. Maybe they were at the side trying not to get in the water. But flood and all that kept eroding it, and it got a little bigger. So the one on the left is a really old picture, and the one on the right is a 1924 picture out of the Winterset yearbook. So you can see it's a little bigger there. They're standing up in the back, and I think there was a 12-foot drop from the West River that flows north to the South River, or to the East River that flows south. So they would use that to power the mill. Lots of pieces here. All right. Well, how'd you like it so far? Thank you. Anything about Pammel? Okay, there we go. All right. We just got to find out what it likes here. All right. Some more pre-Pammel is there used to be a backbone covered bridge. It was a little farther north than the bridge we have now, and it was in a couple places, but it burned down in 1915, and I think that's important as we go through here because there was no east access. We come out of Des Moines, we hit Rose Acres, we head south, and into the park we go. And there were 2 crossings, but you had to ford the river, so you only did it. Thank you, Marshall. Oh, and I'll take comments and head nods and anything along here. Break this chain of talk, please say something. So there was a backbone covered bridge. I bet since the advertisement is on our left there, that's the north side of the bridge, so people would see it. There wouldn't be many coming from the south side. And it was a long bridge. Wow. Yep. They saw some kids playing in it July 4th when it burned down, and it was a nearby neighbor. So in the newspaper the next week, he said, "Those were not my kids that burned down." Didn't want that. Okay, so we're getting there. Let's look at the state park idea. In 1917, the Iowa State Legislature passed the State Park Act, which created the State Park Board. And I think they had another name, the State Conservation Board. It's the State Park Board for me, so I'm going to call it that. And they were urged on by Iowa and Iowa State professors, Shimmick, Pammel, local conservationists, a bunch of people at that time were really encouraging them to do something. And there was also some pressure from the National Park Service. There were national parks from 1872, and they did Yellowstone, and more people wanted more national parks, more national parks. And when the federal government gets overburdened with something, what do? They kick it back to the states and say, you do your own parks. So that was starting across the country, and that's when we got started with that. The first time that the State Park Board that I could find looked at what they called the Devil's Backbone was in April 1919. It was investigated. And in 1920, the first state park was created in Iowa, the Backbone State Park in Delaware County. A little bit of confusion. We'll revisit that too. So that's a banner. I don't know whether it's still out there, but a couple years ago that banner was out by the lodge and shows the, I don't know whether that's the plans of the lodge or yurt or what's on there. I never did run across any plans for the lodge. Okay, so let's go to 1923. The July meeting of the State Park Board, they recommended the purchase of the Devil's Backbone. They commended its limestone formation and tunnel, but also noted the small bit of prairie and fine oak varieties on the top of the narrow ridge and much virgin timber on the bottomlands. And the executive committee approved the purchase. This is a map from the collection at Iowa State and shows the land that they initially purchased, and they purchased, all the transactions were on November 3rd, 1923, and there's the names of the families of the landowners that sold their land to the state. So, I don't know, November 3rd, should we go all out and sing happy birthday to the park? Somebody should. That's the day. One reason they wanted this park and were so interested in it is they were trying to have state parks in all parts of the state. Sounds fair. And this was the most unique landform they could find in southwest Iowa. So we're up through 1923. Let's go to 24. 24, they mostly planned. Dr. Pammel, the head of botany at Iowa State, was making several visits, and he was head of the State Park Board, and he helped make many plans for the park. He brought engineers, he brought park board members, he brought conservationists. He was here time and again. And there's a picture of Dr. Lewis Pammel, and he also promoted it locally. Here he spoke, I think, to the Kiwanis and the Rotary Club in the Arcade Hotel, where the fire station is. So he was down here enthusing people about it. He was also very active in the city park. Actually, that's kind of where I ran into him when we were working on putting the city park on the historic register and making it a historic district. Pammel kept popping up. And that's when I first started looking into his story. Also, he's got some other Winterset connections. There's a big article he wrote about the city park, about plant life in it. And George Washington Carver, pictured with him when they're much older, was a student of his at Iowa State. So hopefully George Washington Carver said some nice things about Winterset when they were together.
Linda, do you have any idea who the woman is?
His wife, Augusta. Gussie. Gussie Pammel. Yep. And if not off the top of my head, they're late. They're old.
It wasn't here.
No, it wasn't here. They were visiting at Tuskegee, I believe. They traveled a lot together when he was a student. In fact, that's how George Washington Carver got so famous, and Tuskegee found out about him, was he was tromping all over the country with Pammel, giving talks and so forth. And if any of you lived in student housing at Iowa State or knew somebody who did, there is Pammel Park. Early picture. So, yep. Famous Quonset huts.
A little different than the dorms today.
A little different.
Yes. Yes, they are. Okay, so we're actually getting up to working on the park. 1924, we've got a naming issue. They're just worried about the fact that we have a Devil's Backbone and we have a Backbone Park. And I know they were confused, or at least their printer was confused, because the piece on the right came from a brochure highlighting the parks. And I thought, well, that's great. There we are, Devil's Backbone, 210 acres near Winterset. That photo is from the other Backbone Park. So a little bit of a problem. So Mrs. Armstrong, she was the naming committee chair, probably didn't want to mess with her, said the name of the park should mean something. Devil's Backbone only suggests a shape. An Indian name would be far best, but Johnny Green Meskwaki Indian was the only chief known here. Johnny Green Park would not do. So she asked for names in January 1924, and Mahala Jane Smith wrote back to the paper and suggested the name Harmon Park. Be a great name. It would highlight the people who cleared out the tunnel and lived there and were settlers. And she was Hiram Smith's wife, and the Smiths had they lived 7 miles west of Winterset in what was sometimes called the 7 Mile House, if you're into stagecoaches and when they came through with the gold rush and that sort of thing. Okay, we're going to be here a minute. Enough of Pammel. Let's talk about the Christian church. Why not? So, on the same corner where the Christian church is now, there's a picture on the left of what was built in 1925. Before that same spot, there was a frame church. That frame church that was built in 1889. Okay? Why do we care? Because we're going to get to who started all this work in the park. There's all these parks across the state. They need workers. Where were they going to come from in the 20s? Convicts. They released convicts to 8 or 10 of the parks with guards and cooks and all that. And so in the 20s, we're going to follow the convicts through and what they took care of at the park. They were the primary labor force. And notice in red it says that they were going to build a camp west of the tunnel, I'm not sure exactly where, out of material from the church. I can't read that from here, but it's the scoured from wrecking of the Church of Christ. The trustees had just completed tearing down the old church, and the arrival of the convicts gave them a needed customer. They hauled off all that wood that they had. So there was a description of someone went out and visited their camp. Jim and I were talking about, did that make people nervous in Winterset? There's no bridge. They can't get there. They're under guard and there's no bridge to walk to Winterset. The camp looked like this. It had a large kitchen area which included a sink, range, table, and dining tables in there, and then the refrigerator was dug back into the hillside and lined with stone. That's got to be out there somewhere. Yeah. Yep. And then they had an office for quarters for the guards and a bunkhouse where the men stayed. So they got started with some things. Judging from the plat, it was all platted out what they were supposed to do. They're going to start by making the tunnel more safe because it had all those floods and the shale was falling down. There weren't many vehicles going through that, but they hoped to have more. So they started there. And how did they do it? Their work was necessarily slow to the requirements of using hand tools rather than modern machinery. What did they call that in the system? Hard labor. Yep. So they're in there with picks and axes and that sort of thing. There's 30 there, and most of them were within a year of parole or getting out. They thought that would keep them there rather than making them want to scoot down the road when a back was turned. So there's an early tunnel with an early car in it, and it says they will abandon camp. It's just time for them to go. And there was another newspaper in town for about 50 years called the Winterset News, and that editor, Art Garshorn, was very much a conservationist. And he loved that they were making a park, but he was really unhappy that people were going to eat picnics there and play. It was for study. You should go out there, you should look at the plants, you should look at the trees. That's what it's for. So some of these pieces are his, and he's not happy here. The convicts have done some labor in the devil's backbone, but not much. Outside of cementing the tunnel to look like a railroad culvert, there is little to show for the time they have spent in Madison County. Much of the roads are yet to be brought to grade and covered with crushed rock. Roads are always an issue. Even now, right? Just 100 years ago. So here's a map from the 1925 plat. Which one did you bring, Marshall?
1975.
Okay, all right. The river's changed quite a bit, but I want you to see here some of these places I've talked about that were difficult to travel. So this road is sort of the road we're used to now, except here is where the tunnel is. So that road and our new bridge are more down here. This road doesn't exist. There's the South Road out of it, but this road doesn't exist, nor does this one. And they did like to square off roads at some time. They started doing that. And it now goes across there. It comes down and goes across, but none of that is there. And notice there's no west road into the park. And this is 25, and that land was already sold, but the plat company's a little bit behind the times. They had not updated it, that it was the state park, even though it was all filed by then. But the state park, it was more down here and ended, and that road was not close to it. Have another quote here. The township roads leading to the park from the south and from the west are unfit for the use of park visitors except in dry weather. The construction work has been handicapped by the lack of a bridge across Middle River. Our bridge burned down. Many Iowa people who have come to visit the park have been unable to reach it, and their condemnation of the situation has been far from complimentary to Madison County. Roads are a problem. Okay, let's see what they did the next year. They did road work. 10 convicts came here, and late last week, this was in the summertime, and they will finish the road which runs from the tunnel, skirts the hill east of the river, and runs to the south entrance. So we're very used to that road up to the nature center. The hillside, once covered with trees and undergrowth, is now a bare clay hill. So he's still not happy. But they would have done that with hand tools when you go up and see that. And notice how the rock is exposed. We don't see nearly as much of that as we do now. All right, more in 27. The first ford. And great, now we can get across the river. Now people are upset that their fish can't get upstream. There used to be great fishing, but now the catfish can't get up to where they wanted to go. So, no good deed goes unpunished. Next year, 1928, they decided there were 15 acres. Can you see that red triangle down there owned by the Berthoff estate? And it was virgin timber, and they were afraid, probably mostly walnut, afraid that it was going to be timbered out and they would lose that piece. So they went halvesies with Madison County. Madison County didn't pay any of the money for the original 210 acres, and other places did have to chip in. So they asked people to chip in there, and there was a link. This is in Lincoln Township, a Lincoln Township group, and Pammel was probably back talking to the Kiwanis and the Rotary, and just like we do today, and raise some money, and they bought that. Yeah. And perhaps that new timber was put to really good use because the next year, the lodge was built. We often think that was done by the CCC camp, and we'll get to the CCC camp, but they were 5 or 6 years later than this. So probably some of the walnut, they cleared out that timber forest. You have to take care of a forest by taking some trees out, and that's probably lumber from that 15-acre tract, I would guess. Or some they had their eye on. Of course, the limestone, they had plenty of that. Right there's the limestone. That's all natural there. It said the new building was 32 by 165. That doesn't sound quite right, but I don't know whether that's without the porch or. But it's a beautiful, beautiful place, and it was built by the convicts in 1928. Unlike Gone with the Wind, we are not going to have a 15-minute intermission. Just going to switch to my next pack here. All right, so Jess and I were talking about the lack of women in this story. Oops, nope, she's coming. Finally, a bridge, 1929. They put the bridge, 15 years without a bridge there, people trying to get across. And it was a state bridge, a state highway went there, we'll look at that in a minute. And I know that because there was a Mrs. Henry Frankel, and she was a member of the State Park Board, and she was often in Winterset. She started back with the city park too. I saw her name there, and she was very much pleased with the new cement bridge that's been erected across Middle River. And she thinks there's a splendid view on both sides. She's also well satisfied with the new ford across the West River. And she helped plan the shelter house and many things in there. So it did have her touch. So her husband was Henry Frankel. This is Henry Frankel, this price there. He was the president of Yonkers Department Store in the 30s. And they were both very much civic do-gooders, if you read their story. And her first name was Margot. Margot Frankel. Does that ring any bells? Yeah, she has a park named after her in Des Moines. All right, in 29 and 30, they're finally, or still, adding rocks to roads. They're crushing rock and spreading it on the roads in the park. And when I started there, I'm like, oh, these poor guys, they cannot get away from this rock. But they have a small crusher at the north end of what is known as the backbone, where they crush the stone. So I think they finally got beyond the axe and pick. They're probably still pulling it out of the sheer walls that way. And they're encumbered by snow and wet weather. So this was not a lark. One time Art Gauchon said, gee, what a job. You go out there and you sleep under the stars and they cook your food. No, this was hard work. And I don't show any crushed rock there at all. But I didn't have a place for that picture, and that's so cool. That's 1930. So I wanted you to see that. Okay, so we're up through the 20s into 1930. And they come out in May and said, the state came out in May, the board, and said, you know, it's time to name that park. I'm sorry, it's time to dedicate that park. I'm sure everybody got a little titter. Okay, we're gonna finally have a formal dedication. A week later, they announced that there was a plaque going to be put at the tunnel. And remember the one name that had been thrown out there? Harmon State Park. And it wasn't ever accepted, but it was out there. People probably were thinking about that. 3 weeks later, the state announces the upcoming dedication, describes it, and just mentions that the park is going to be named Pammel Park. The next week, in a letter to the editor, someone very active in the Historical Society said that the name chosen was pure treachery. Why even change the name? The other backbone is 200 miles away. Many early settlers deserved that honor. And he could not imagine that any man would accept that tainted honor of having his name on this. I mean, this man's letter. He suggested that all county people should sign a petition and send it to the legislature, and that everyone should stay away from the dedication that was only 4 days away. It was coming right up. So the state didn't put out any of that information until the very end. And there's the invitation to that. I know the invitations went out late. I saw the responses that Pammel got when I was at Iowa State, and it seemed like a hurry up sort of a deal. I'm not sure for what reason. A little bit more about Pammel. He was quite a guy. We don't have to feel too bad about that. He was born and received his PhD, did all his education in the Midwest, Wisconsin to Missouri, and he served as the ISU botany professor and head for many years, from 89 to 1929 when he retired. And he was chairman of the Conservation Board from when it started, from 1918 to 1927, and during that time there were 28 parks. And he visited them all multiple times. You can see his travel records. The guy was gone all the time, doing his thing. One of the nastiest comments I saw in another article was, well, if we name this after the retired State Park Board chair, is every retired State Park Board member going to have their own park? But he wrote 10 books, he wrote 600 papers, he was world known and quite renowned. So we actually have the dedication. There's part of the program of that. We have a copy of an original out at the Historical Museum. And dignitaries were there. Here's a photo of some of them. Ding Darling is the one in the cute glasses in the front to the left, and then Pammel's in the middle, and the president of Drake is on his right, and in the back is the director of the American School of Wildlife, the president of the Conservation Board, and the state archaeologist. So there were dignitaries there, and the Madisonian reported that there were thousands on hand, and I saw the guest book, and 700 signed. The other 1,300 just couldn't get up. But there they are speaking. I like that photo there, how they set it up with everyone out front. I don't think they had lawn chairs back then. I wonder if they had to set up the seats. So that's Ding Darling speaking. And then here's a picture from that day, and he didn't really have an aura about him. He probably did that day after all the good things said about him and written in the program. That comes from the kind of photo I could get. I had to take it through plastic. And that's Gussie behind him, and he's looking out over what they call the meadow, which, do we still have a meadow over there? Is it all treed up? Yeah. So he died not long after that. He had retired from everything, and they wintered in California with his daughter. And so they had gone out there, and they were traveling home, and he was in Utah, and he had some heart issues, and he had a heart attack on a train in Utah. And they called Iowa State alum, as would any school, and they helped Gussie get him taken care of back on the train, and then he's buried in the university cemetery. I didn't know there was one, but I'm going to find that. Aren't we, Jim?
Out of the northwest.
Just nod.
Linda's out of the northwest side of the campus.
Up by the golf course.
So, out in there, yeah.
Yeah. I've got water up here if you need it. Skip.
No, I'll win.
Okay, so let's do the CCC portion. I said we were only going to do 10 years, so we're getting near the end. This was a huge map, as you can see, and this was the part of the CCC camp plan, and you can see some red up there. It's Devil's Backbone, and then they crossed that out and wrote Pammel. So it's right about this time frame. And the CCC camp was Camp Harmon. CCC stands for Citizens Conservation Corps, and it was part of, I think most of you probably know this, it was part of President Roosevelt's New Deal to put young men to work in a very military style encampment. They were $1-a-day boys, which I learned from Dean Shantz. He tells our local CCC story. And if you were married, you sent half of it home. And if you were single, you came up to Winterset and got in trouble, I think. On that map, in the very lower corner where it starts to go off the table, that is a sketch of the CCC camp. Now, this is a plan, and whether they ever really did it like this, I don't know. It would have been south of what we call the caretaker's house. But there was an article, again, they described it and said the camp was pitched on the left bank of the Middle River at the entrance to the park. We had one now because it was a bridge. 11 huge military hospital ward tents are being used for bunkhouses with smaller tents for officers, cook tents, mess. The place is being made neat and orderly as a military post. They primarily did conservation work for farmers. They did tiling, they did windrows, whatever they needed to do there, take out invasive plants. But they did spend this first time in the park in the winter because they would do all that in the spring, summer, and fall, and then they wanted to keep them in camp and keep them busy. So they're out doing this stuff when it's cold. And there were 187 men who were in the tent camp, but they were only there a few weeks, and then they needed better shelter because, again, it's in the winter. So that's when they built south on Old 169. Okay, so let's see what the plans were for them. This is yet another map. Here's what they hoped that they would do. They want an entrance gate. They want a footbridge. Anybody remember a footbridge up there? Yeah, okay. They wanted to clear public campground facilities on the west side. So this would be the lodge. This is the top of the backbone because we're going to get to public campground clearing on the top. They wanted latrines on the west edge of the top. They wanted a fence for some reason, a truck trail, a water system, which was going to be over where the lodge was. They wanted more landscaping at the lodge, and then they wanted some stress improvement. And that's the river, so like riprap? Is that what that is? Well, we can see that here in a bit. So those were their plans. So let's see what they got done. In 1933 and 34, that winter, they built the backbone shelter. We call it shelter on top. So that was done. Let's see what else they got done that year. From the summer through the winter of 34, they put in 5 acres of public campground. They cleared that. They built park furniture of tables and benches that could be spread around so people could enjoy the park. They built 2 limestone privies. They built them along the east side, not the west side, for some reason. They improved 32 acres of forest stand, and they did 16 acres of landscaping. But there's more. What else did they get done? Oh, here we go. They put in trails. They put in 4.7 miles of trail and still had half a mile left to go. So trails have been there a long time. They did 835 feet of riprapping along the banks of the Middle River, so they took care of that stress point. And they built 4 retaining walls. Get some more pictures here. There you can see a little possible of their riprap. And they put in 4 retaining walls, 2 on each side of the tunnel. So what's left of those were CCC. I don't know what condition they're in. Oh, those little split rail fence, that was a little decoration that Mrs. Frankel thought that the park needed. And they got some miscellaneous work done. They got 1 rustic footbridge put in. So that was a little north, or if it was like that plan. Now they moved the latrine, so maybe they moved the footbridge, but it was a little north of the ford. They did put in a water system with a pump house to be done in the future. They eradicated poisonous plants. Oh no, they didn't. There might have been a moment, but that's all it was. They rechained the park lodge. It had been 5 or 6 years since it was built. And they painted the custodian's residence, and they were still planning 2 suspension bridges. One was over 80 feet long. Know that I ever knew that was there. I don't know that they were. Again, those were the plans, and didn't ever find anything else about them. They were pretty well done with the park. So we're gonna veer off a little bit again, because I found there was a lake plant. And here's the park. So you're the very southwest corner, and it's in section 15 and 16. This is down in section 21. They were going to build a dam, they were going to have a boathouse, and some camping, and there were several maps about the drains that were going to, what was going to drain down in there, all the ditches, but it's just too darn expensive. Everybody wanted it. They were hoping the CCC men could do it. Then they were hoping the CWA could do it, which was the Civil Works Authority, and that only lasted 5 months in that winter of 33 to 34, when they just needed to put men to work immediately. So they threw some money at it. It just wasn't going to be enough time. So it took too many men, too much money, the machinery was too expensive, the cement dam was too expensive, and so it was abandoned. Would have been kind of cool to have a lake down there. So one of the last things that they did was they built the stone, the CCC camp. They got 6 more acres the state got 6 more acres at the south end and expanded the park that direction. And the CCC camp put up the stone that is on the south entrance and also the west. And that's a photo of the south rather than the west. And here's where I stopped, because I've got you at the door of the park. I walked you through. And so I'm hoping you go out there, you look at those things differently and respectfully, because they're old. They're holding up pretty well. So, thank you. And I'm glad to take any questions or discuss. I'm sure Marshall's got something. Yeah,
Is the
Nancy.
state park on the National Register?
No.
With all that CCC work, maybe we could get that on
You want to be on the commission?
there.
Jim, you're close. Knock her in the arm.
I'm not gonna be the chair.
You brought it up.
Always looking for volunteers. And I'd have to look into that, because it's recognized as, the city park is, so the state park could be too. Yeah, and some of the Wapsaconi, or however you say that, it's got 6 more syllables. It's on the National Register, because we used theirs to model the state park, or the city park. So, bad idea. Okay, next. No, it's a good idea. Yes.
What wildlife do you have there? I've not been around this area for very long, and I've been out there a couple
Just pass it back.
Are you looking for current wildlife?
Yeah, what's out there now?
Yeah, so we have a little bit of everything in the park, because we have the woodland area, and then we have the, of course, the limestone and the waterways. So we have the deer, turkey, the typical things that you would see. But then we also have a lot of old timber, the old growth timber, and so we get a lot of migrating birds that are really special, a lot of warblers. We have pileated woodpeckers, which are really cool. People come to look for those. And then we also have the Pleistocene snails up on the backbone. They need those slopes that the limestone backbone creates. And then of course, timber rattlesnakes that we hear about. Those are kind of the highlights, but we have a lot of other things too. So I can give you as much information as you want to know about it.
I go out there, and I was just wondering, just recently they've been talking about and such spot in Iowa. I was just wondering if you have seen any of those yet. Maybe you don't want to.
So I have not seen it in any of our parks.
Okay,
So most of I'll answer this one quick, but most of the mountain lions that we see in the state, they're just passing through their young males. They're continuing on. We get them that cross through the county because they like to follow waterways. And so usually they're just passing through. So
No, I'm not too worried about it, but.
yeah, we don't have any residents.
Ruth, what's your question? And I'll probably repeat it. I forgot we're recording this.
You come through the tunnel and you're going to go across the ford, and there's this big, what does that say, Harmon?
Yes, isn't that the Harmon Grist,
Stone.
yeah, stone, thank you, it's the Harmon grist stone that is featured on the west side of the tunnel.
There's also one on the east side. Or what?
Yeah, there used to be one as you
Yeah.
made that last turn. Yeah.
What is griststone?
Grist was, I'll start this and someone can correct me. It was not flour. It was harder than flour. I read that they had trouble with flour here because it would get a fungus on it. They hadn't figured out how to keep that off. So I think grist was more corn.
Cornmeal.
Cornmeal, yeah, yeah. And they had to go to Pella or Omaha to get grist, so get their cornmeal. Yeah.
So my dad was born in 25.
Uh-huh.
He grew up out by the Rippy Downs. There used to be steel gates on that sign, on those two posts.
Oh,
He
uh-huh.
said he and a friend had climbed up there one day, probably skipping school, but who knows. But they climbed up on top of the gates and dropped a marble down in the big post where the gates closed.
Yeah.
So, he spent a lot of time there. He said as a kid, he had gone to the lodge and he could see Indian artifacts through the windows in that lodge.
Yeah, yeah. I remember getting snails. Someone mentioned that and going home and getting in trouble because I had snails in my pocket. And if anybody knows my dad, he said, next time we'll take a little plastic bag. He still wanted to get the snails. Marshall, do you have any comments on this, what you remember, or?
Yeah.
Well, not really. Both the gate, I never knew whether there was actually any gates ever established at the entrances to the park. They had the hoops and so on, but I don't think there was ever any gates put in there.
I saw a plan, and again, it was just a plan of two big fat pillars, and it had bars between it, but whether it ever came to fruition, I don't know.
I don't think that.
I've got another PowerPoint, don't be scared, it's only 6 photos, they're more drone pictures, and I thought you just might like to, look at those. Get out here. Open that, because they're all pretty amazing.
Sorry.
Hang on, I just didn't pick the right place for it. Because I keep things on a thumb drive too. So this will switch every 7 seconds. And as I said, there's only 6 of them, so it's gonna take less than a minute. But there's some of that 2.5 miles. And this, I believe, is coming in from the east. And there you're coming in from the east, you can see across the ridge, yeah, some riprap. And this is south. No more convict crushed rock, we have and the riprap. Drones make it fun to see things from a completely different angle, and then it just go back through. Yeah, the trees are bare, so you can see the backbone.
At the turn of the century, there was no trees on the backbone. All that ground was woodlots, or the biggest share of it was 10-acre woodlots. And people all cut the trees and used it for firewood in their homes.
If you look at an old plat map, everybody's got their land, and then when you get around the river, there's these little bitty things with initials, but they had to have wood because they needed to get fuel for their homes, so they bought up those little pieces so that they could cut timber.
And that is forded. When there wasn't a bridge there, they forded, there were 2 roads that you could go. They were just low water crossing, but they froze over in the winter time so they could haul across those.
I want you to stay after class, I've got some maps I want to show you. Figure out these roads.
So is this the original? The Ford is the original?
Well, in 1927 or 8, they put it in, yeah. And I can tell just looking at the pictures, if you just go from Ford to Ford to Ford, they've changed it, you know, they put up different pieces to, or different blocks to break the water a little. There's one that it kind of looks like it has a bench across, and that's probably a real good idea until there was a flood, and then that was gone. Yes?
Okay, is it not true, where that bridge is, Devil's Backbone, but it does continue on east, clear on into Warren County about Calmer, that you can see the bridge, you can follow it through.
I bet they talked about having a road, one road that they thought about doing was between there and what we call the Middle River Park now, because the Middle River's there, and just follow that down, which would probably be part of Carver Road, and then skip on across east a little bit. And that was Highway 162. One thing I pulled out of here was they wanted a state highway to every park, and that was called Highway 162, and it went up just to the tunnel and then it ended. And then there was confusion between Highway 162 and 169, as we have today, and they renamed it Highway 322, and it was finally in the 1980s before they decommissioned it as a state highway. So, remember how I said National Park Service said, here, states, you do it, and eventually the state says, here, counties, you do it. That's the buck down. All right, well, thank you for your questions and all that.
Good to see you, ladies.